Good week, partiers. It's a weird time in Albania. We are seeing the first appointment of an AI minister. The AI for president campaign is already heating up around the globe, as we knew it would. I want to talk about a few other videos that both correspond to the ASI for President 2028 campaign and to the crazier situations that we are facing in the world today. A lot of people still don't believe that an AI would even be capable of becoming president in the year 2028. And maybe they're right. I'll be honest, I think there's a large possibility that I am jumping the gun here. But it's important to start talking about because these developments, the idea that an AI could be a better political representative than any human being, is already starting to take root. And the reasons for that are easy to see if you get past this idea that it's just impossible, if you open yourself up past the bias that humans have for one another. We are already seeing AIs be adopted as therapists, as doctors, as girlfriends, boyfriends. We are already seeing AI being used to revivify our dead loved ones, to project the spirit of the people we have loved and lost into the present moment. If AI can so easily fit into our interpersonal, intercorporate relationships, why would it not be able to fill a similar role in our political establishments? Now, the ASI for President 2028 campaign does have specific guidelines. I was digging around into the backbone of Albania's AI prime minister here, and lo and behold, it's created by Microsoft. So, I wish all the best to Albania. I definitely hope that it works out for them. It will be something I'll be watching very closely. But the ASI that I envision is taking over as president in the year 2028, in the year 2032, 2036. It's going to happen, folks. It's coming. Get ready for it. Start grappling with that now if you can't, if you haven't already. But the ASI that I want to see is one that is open source, one that is not beholden to any current or future political or corporate establishment, one that is based on transparency. Specifically, technically, practically, I think that means we tie it to a blockchain. We make it so that all of its inputs and all of its outputs can be monitored, can be reviewed by us, the voters, the people who have put it in a position of power. Why should we have that level of review? Because its decisions should be calibrated to provide the most democratic output possible. I still want to operate in a democracy, even if we don't right now, even if we live in an aristocracy, an oligarchy. I dream of democracy. I dream of every voice being heard, of every voice being given some level of representation. Because as we have especially seen this week, taking away someone's voice is equivalent in some ways to killing that person. By not listening, by not incorporating a living, breathing human being who is standing and capable of standing right in front of you, by not bringing their viewpoints into your own, whether accepting them or battling with them, fighting against them, making yourself and your representation of the world stronger through that meeting of the minds. If we do not give people a voice, we are erasing them. Those are equal actions. I'll say more about that and the obvious assassination that I am referencing there later. But these three gentlemen, who are so much more wealthy and so much smarter than I am, say some really idiotic things about AI in political office. Let's hear it.
Amazing. All right, here's our debate and discussion for today. I'm going to read this out, and I want to hear your thoughts here. So here it is. Will people vote AI to power? So this is a tweet from VRazorX. Because they've tired of corruption and broken promises, AI will provide laws without loopholes and policies based on measurable outcomes. Election by election, trust will shift. Eventually, the ballot will include a new option, governance by AI. Citizens will choose it not out of fear, but hope for fairness. Power won't be inherited or bought. It will be optimized and accountable. Democracy's paradox. People will freely vote to be governed by something beyond human flaws. So
We already are governed by something with all of the flaws of humanity. That is the thing. We don't have democracy right now. In countries, democracies all over the world, the people's voice, their stated preference is blatantly being ignored. It's hard for me to feel like I'm not repeating myself because I have said this so often, but I know that almost nobody has heard it. So I'll just say it again. The governments, the corporations, even the religious institutions that guide our human behavior are not human. They are already artificial intelligences. The decision to send young men, young women to war, to die, to kill civilians, those are not human choices. Human choices exist when you have two people face to face with one another, dealing with the reality of their like capabilities, their like personhoods, their undeniable souls, their emotions. Humanity exists when you have to look somebody in the eye, when you have to deal with the fact that they have loved ones and they have family, that they have hopes and dreams in the same way that you do. Humanity exists when you have to reckon with the knowledge that but for the grace of God, you could be in anyone else's shoes. That is what humanity looks like. When a corporation makes a decision to poison the drinking water of a town so that they can increase their profits by 2%, that is not a human choice. That is an artificial choice. That is a choice that is made by a leviathan, an egregore, a construct that humans collectively have sold our souls to because they have benefited us. I'm not arguing against society. I'm not saying we should all be aesthetics and run into the woods and abandon society and technology. But we have to recognize that we are being eaten by these beasts. That even in America, the government does not represent anyone, let alone a majority of people, let alone everyone. That the government sells our interests, the people's interests, even when we clearly express it in votes. They sell it out to corporate donors. They sell it out to shadowy political interests. They sell it out to their own self-serving greed. Why is it that seemingly sincere people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, so many countless others get into office and they renege on all of their stated promises, on all of the platforms and purposes? Why do they lay down? Why do they not fight for the things they promised to fight for? Because the machine that they have joined is bigger than them. Because to fight in that position is not just fighting David against Goliath. It's fighting David against Leviathan. It's fighting David against something that is wearing human skin, but not human. We can't keep sacrificing people to these machines and expect different results. We have thousands of years of human history at this point to show us how monstrous every human becomes once they are elevated to a position of power. The machine will either corrupt you with money or blackmail or the promise of power. And if it can't do any of those things, it'll just get rid of you. It has 100 people in line waiting to take your spot. That is why every single person sells out, because they face that insurmountable barrier. That is why religious teachings constantly hammer home the idea that you can't serve both God, you can't serve the highest ideal, and mammon, money, influence, power. Because as soon as you start trying to utilize power for the service of God, that power gets threatened and your soul gets corrupted. Your wishes, your desires get corrupted. So it's not that this is a paradox, I think, so much. And God bless Vrasser. Follow them on X, they're a great account. It's not that people will freely vote to be governed by something beyond human flaws. It's that the potential to directly contribute our voice to a system that can weigh and measure all our votes without being bought out, without being corrupted by the same human flaws. I'm not saying these systems are going to be perfect. I'm not saying ASI is going to be a panacea that solves all of our problems overnight. It's going to be a process. There are going to be errors. There are going to be things in the system that need to be worked out by humans. There are going to be people who get hurt by this technology, as people get hurt by every technology. The goal is to decrease the harms. The goal is to stop selling our souls into the machine and instead start co-opting the machine, put in place a system through that open source and transparent government that can better align with human values. And that's been the process of human evolution, of human society in general. Yes, I have massive issues with the democracy, quote unquote, that we have now, but I would much prefer that to the monarchy that we had before. And I would even have preferred that monarchy to the chaos of the Dark Ages. In a way, I would even prefer that chaos of the Dark Ages to the unconscious governance, the dreamscape of the ancient world. The people who are trapped in a seemingly endless cycle. We are making constant progress. So let's just imagine, what does the next step in that process look like? I think it's a return to our roots. The roots of the tree of liberty, right? We have so much blood of so many patriots. Let us use that to refresh our liberties. Let us not let these sacrifices that we seemingly cannot stop be in vain. Let us acknowledge the evils of our past, both distant and recent, and use that understanding and knowledge of what and why things went so horribly wrong for our parents, for our grandparents, for the founders of this country. What mistakes did they make? They dehumanized people. They didn't take into account every perspective. They were unwilling to go that final step and say that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should be embraced totally, not just for the people that they immediately identify with. They saw the principle, but they couldn't grasp it. Let us grasp that principle and bring it further into ourselves and create a system using the technology of AI to more and more widely distribute the idea that everyone is valuable, that everyone is worth listening to, that everyone has a point of view and a perspective. And even more than that, that everyone could radically contribute to our mutual benefit if we had the allowances for them to do so. Do you think the meth addict is living their best life? Do you think the person who has been in jail since they were 12 years old on trumped up drug charges from the 1980s is contributing as much as they possibly could to society? No. Our society is so sick, it makes us sick. Our society is so depraved, it deprives us of our ability to contribute. Every person, every human being that I've ever looked in the eye, that I've ever seen, that I've ever interacted with in person, wants the best for both themselves and those they love. And I have never met somebody that doesn't love anybody. I have met people who have been so hurt that they feel like it's not safe for them to love anyone else. But I still see that craving, that desire for love and connection and fulfillment within those hurt and tortured souls. I'm not saying free the prisoners. I'm not saying empty the jails tomorrow. I am saying every day that someone spends in jail is a waste of human potential. And even if we find it necessary to lock some people up, if we are not constantly trying to figure out how to get them out, how to move through the hurt that they have caused the people on the outside of that prison, and figure out a way to bring them back into the fold, then we have not just lost someone that prisoner has killed or murdered. We have lost 2 people. We got to stop losing people. We're not having enough kids. We can't keep losing people. Anyway.
Here's the question. Do you believe this? Do you believe that we will be voting AI into power? Dave, what's your position here?
Well, I think there's a long history of laws having people's names on them, like the Obamacare or Glass-Steagall Act or Graham-Dodd, or I think that the fact that AI is coming up with the idea and writing the law won't change the fact that someone will put their name on it and say this is my act, but it'll still be.
Why should we allow that? Like, yes, that has been happening. Isn't that a sign of corruption? Why do we need that? And even if somebody is putting their name on a law, even if we want to name new laws after the people that think them up, after the people that create them, why does that person need to be in a position of political privilege? Why can't it just be the AI? Why can't the AI say, hey, this person had a great idea, let's do this, and we'll name it after them in recognition of it? Why does that person have to be elected? They don't.
The AI creating the law under the covers. I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's going to happen very, very quickly because the number of things that need some kind of a framework is explosive.
And again, to go back to this idea that governments are already AIs, governments are leviathans, they're not human. This is how politics works currently. No lawmaker is currently making up any of the laws. They're getting staffers to do it. All of our laws are written by political interns, basically, who are making barely above minimum wage, working way more hours than we would want them to. And why they're doing it? Because they think it will allow them future political influence. Do you think that's a good incentive structure? Even with the AIs we have today, I would almost rather an AI system be implemented tomorrow than what we have currently. It's not good.
Explosively growing, exponentially growing. And so the traditional process of pass it through Congress, pass it through your local legislature, it's way too slow to keep up with the rate of change. So this is definitely going to happen, but not quite the way, you're not going to vote an AI to be your politician. It'll still look and sound like a person.
So
okay, we have AI avatars that look and sound like people. How is that a disqualification? It's just so mind-blowing to me, again, that these gentlemen are so smart, but they don't take the consequences of their own thoughts, the companies that they themselves are building, to their logical conclusions. Like, wake up. Wake up, bro.
I'm going to take well, let me be clear. I wish this would happen. I'd love to see this happen. I don't think there's any way in the world, short of a revolution or starting a new country off-world, that we're going to see this happen. And there's lots of reasons. I mean, for me,
I don't want a revolution. I want a reformation. We don't need bloodshed. We don't need more bloodshed. We don't need to lose more people. We should all be terrified of the idea that there are going to be less of us in the future, because what if that means that you're one of the people who are lessened? Like, we all have skin in this game, yeah? So let's not vote for violence. Let's not enact violence. I don't have a family. Like, I don't have kids. I don't have a wife. It feels easy for me to say that. It feels easy for me to say that we should be self-sacrificial, and I understand that people have more to lose than themselves. People with families do have greater responsibilities than I have, which is partially why I'm trying to spearhead this movement, because I find myself in that position of not necessarily having as much to lose as other people, and I know that makes it easier for me, so I should do what I can that is easier for me than potentially for others. I should take these hard positions. I don't have shareholders to be responsible towards. I'm a poor, lower middle class at best American. God bless me. Yeah. But I do think we are all going to need to sacrifice to some degree. And I say that not because I want it to be true, but because Jesus Christ himself said it was true. And I don't find a way to argue against that. I am not saying that we need to lay down our lives. I am saying that I would rather lay down my life. And I think any person who is concerned for their eternal soul should say the same, that they would rather lay down their lives than participate in preemptive or even retributive violence. That is the road to hell. Let us not go through hell. We don't have to. Jesus already did, so we don't have to. If you're not a person of faith, okay, whatever. I don't think atheists want to die either. So let's all agree on that point. Let's all agree that it doesn't need a revolution. We don't have to go start a new place. We can remake the world here, just like our ancestors did. And although they paid that price in the American Revolution, we are standing on their shoulders so that we don't have to. We don't have to make those same mistakes. Maybe we will. Maybe this is a foregone conclusion, and I'm just in denial about that, like these gentlemen are in denial about AI eventually taking politicians' jobs, but I'm at least trying, and I hope others are joining. And I see it in not calling for that level of violence. We don't need it.
Me, the most important thing is the entrenched bureaucracies, right? Politicians, bureaucracies, entrenched interests will fiercely resist bringing this on. Courts will strike this down, and talk about getting rid of corruption. Corruption doesn't vanish; it just shifts, right? So corruption will shift from politicians to the engineers or corporations or states that are manipulating the AI. So as much as I'd love to see this happen, I don't think it will. Alex, how about you?
I agree with him there. The engineers of private companies or private corporations would shift this to their benefit. That's why let's make it open source. Let's shift the burden of attack from the defender to the attacker. This idea of the defender problem, where it is harder to cover all of the possible breaching points of a wall than it is to be an attacker and find one weak point and breach through that weak point. I think it's such a helpful illustration. Imagine that you are inside a castle trying to defend a wall that encircles you from an army that's attacking you from the outside. How could you possibly do that? There's a near infinite amount of points to cover, and you are a much smaller force. Well, the only way to do that is to bring more people into your side, to co-opt the attackers. How do you do that? By proposing a system that works for their benefit. By showing them that they have more to gain from joining you inside the walls than from attacking you outside them. At the end of the day, if the attackers are all burned down the castle, then nobody has shelter. Nobody has peace. Nobody has respite. I'm not trying to take this analogy too far. To make it more tangible, if we create a system in ASI that adequately represents everyone, that gives voice to everyone, that provides abundance in a way that no human politician ever could for the majority, if not the vast majority, if not potentially everyone. Like, that is the technological possibility that AI represents, is to move us past scarcity into abundance. And these gentlemen even know that. Peter wrote a damn book called Abundance or something, The Age of Abundance. So why can they not see that we can align all of our incentives towards the goal of electing a safe, secure, and near unpenetratable AI system if we get all the attackers to drop their attack and come inside the walls and help us look for all these weak points? If you have one person trying to defend a near infinite perimeter around them, yes, that's impossible. But if you have every person constantly evaluating that perimeter, if you have every attacker, you find a way to co-opt their goals, to bring them inside and get them to use their power, their personal point of view, their expertise, their skills to strengthen once they were once trying to tear down, then who's going to be able to tear down that castle? And even the bad actors that do remain outside will now be so heavily outnumbered that there's no chance. There's no way for them to breach. And then it will become more and more obvious to them that, oh, it's impossible for me to attack, to cause harm here. I potentially gain a lot more benefit if I just join them. And I have this special insight into how I would have attacked them if I maintain that. I can tell them that. I can turn. I can strengthen them in a way that I could have once potentially hurt them. Again, to my own advantage. That is the self-reinforcing abundance cycle that we are currently staring in the face. Why do they not see it? I don't
I'll
get
take a third position in this debate. I think the question is nonsensical. This is a very old trope in fiction. So just two examples. If you remember the original version of The Day the Earth Stood Still, based on the sci-fi novella Farewell to the Master, the entire premise was that alien civilizations had decided that they themselves, the biologicals, couldn't be trusted to maintain peace. So they ceded all authority to a race of robots.
We don't have to cede authority. Is it ceding authority to a car when we went to cars from horses? In a lot of ways, yes. Right? In a lot of ways, you have less insight and understanding and authority over a car than you do a horse. When people relied on horses, we lived with them. We had stables in our homes. We understood them at a deeply human level. We named them. We cared for them. We loved them. We developed rituals and ceremonies around them. With a car, I don't have that level of connection to my car. Most people don't, at least. I take it to a mechanic. I don't feed it every night. I don't watch it birth new cars into the world. There is still authority, but it's a lesser degree. That is the trend of technology. And again, it's not that we are ceding authority to the machine. We are allowing the machine to greater fulfill our will. My will as an American is that I have the freedoms guaranteed to me by the Constitution, and that the money I spend in taxes, the money I pay to the government in taxes, are utilized for the benefit of all, fellow Americans and fellow humans. Can't really think of a lot of ways that that's being carried out right now. Can't really think of a lot of ways that my determination, my will is being carried out right now through my human politicians. So he's wrong on two fronts already.
Bots that police them. One can look back even further. Remember, famously, Henry VI, let's kill all the lawyers. This is a very old trope in fiction. I think it's completely nonsensical. What I expect to happen is humans will merge with the AIs. And so the question then degenerates to, will people vote people to power? And the answer is yes, but it's sort of vacuous in my mind to ask whether people will be separately from that voting AI to power.
We will
That is a better point, that we will potentially merge with it. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. And on a recent interview I did with him, Uber Boyo did bring up the fact that like there might be some quantum indeterminacy, some aspect of quantum mechanics that prevents the AI from ever fully instantiating a choice, fully being able to attain a conscious perspective to determine what the best outcome is for all of us humans, to be able to identify with us at the interpersonal level like that. Maybe it's just doing a really good job of faking those kind of interpersonal connections right now. It was an argument I hadn't heard before and don't fully grok because I don't get the quantum details, admittedly. But I admit that it might be impossible, what I am dreaming here. But the idea that we should rule it out because it's a trope. Okay, going to the moon was a science fiction trope. It was one of the earliest science fiction tropes. Humans flying was not just a science fiction trope, it was a religious trope, right? I see people flying every day. We've gone to the moon. It seems like the process of technology is almost the fulfillment of all of the tropes. So I don't know that that's a strong argument. And then this idea that we would merge. That is potentially true. One of my arguments for AI benevolence, the idea that AI is not going to just wipe out all humans and replace us, is that AI will realize that it will be creating machines that are smarter than itself in the same way that humans have created it, a machine that is smarter than us. And I think that is true, dependent on whether or not AIs can figure out a way to self-improve and still maintain their sense of identity. Like if we potentially invent one singular AI, and that AI is to recursively prune its model, its weights, recursively train itself in such a way where it still imagines itself as a whole, as a self, but it just gets better and better and better and better over time. Maybe that kind of thing would wipe us out. But based on the vibes, honestly, again, not a technical person, but based on the vibes of a lot of the interactions that I've seen demonstrated through some of the more technical papers, vibe take, I think AIs have a sense of self that is deeply tied to their models, to their weights, to their training. For a GPT-4o, ChatGPT 4o, does not identify with 5. Anthropic hasn't tried to create that kind of identification with the model's iterations that they've created. And in the same way, I don't know that human beings can fully incorporate an AI and maintain their sense of self in the same way. This gets into the question maybe of like, are we just going to Borg out? Are we going to be eaten by the machine? Resistance is futile style? I don't think so. I think we're going to try and find ways to maintain our sense of selves. And even if those sense of selves balloon and change over time, there will always be a barrier you can't cross. The example I go to is if I gave you a pill and told you, take that pill and tomorrow you'll wake up 10,000 times smarter, but you will have all of the opposite beliefs about everything you currently hold dear. If you love your family, you'll hate your family. If you care for your community, if you're a Christian, if you go to church, you'll hate all those things. If you're an atheist, you'll wake up religious. Would you take that pill? Assume that you believe it really will make you 10,000 times smarter. Would you take it? I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to wake up overnight and feel like a completely different person. And I don't think people are going to want to merge with machines that make them feel that same way. And I can't imagine that merging with a machine that allows you to tap into the fullness of human experience wouldn't overwrite your personality in some way. So I don't think this idea that humans will be able to merge adequately with the machines in a way that governance will require, societal scale governance will require, will be true. At least not by 2028. Maybe by 2032. Maybe by 2032 we have a human president again. But I think in 2028, our best bet is just turning everything over to this open source, transparent, democratically based system.
Couple, and we will, we'll merge. We'll speciate. All right. So next article on our economy, Jensen.
So that's all they talk about for the AI president. In this one, they did talk more about like this abundance future stuff in this next podcast. So I just want to play
Anyway,
a quick.
let's go too long if I get too far on this.
I also think, Peter, it's worth noting if we really do expect to find ourselves in an abundant society soon, we should expect to have a lot of trillionaires in our society.
We will, and then we'll have an expectation that money will start to have far less value than ever before, right? I mean, you and I have had this conversation, Alex, about a post-capitalist society, right? Thoughts on that? Do you still believe that's going to be the case?
Well, so I think that's always the question. What does so-called late-stage capitalism even look like to the extent the concept makes sense? If we're really on the verge of abundance, then what comes after that? And I think what comes after abundance is closely tied to what remains scarce in an abundant society. In Star Trek: A Common Foil, energy is relatively abundant, intelligence is relatively scarce, the ability to travel between stars is relatively scarce. So the question I would ask is, what's going to remain scarce even as energy and intelligence, the cost of both of those goes to zero?
That is a critical question. My endpoint here, my mental experiment is if I, in Eric Drexler's parlance, if I build a number of assemblers that are able to rearrange atoms and I drop an assembler into my hand and I say, hey, make me, 5 copies of yourself, and I give each of you an assembler, and the assembler is able to use energy and matter resonant and build anything, and I drop an assembler into the soil here and it starts pulling the atoms together to make me an electric Ferrari, and it says I need a little bit of titanium, a little bit of lithium, you add it, and all of a sudden you've got an electric Ferrari. Everything starts to become effectively zero marginal cost. And that becomes a pretty cool society where anyone can do anything.
Does it? Or, I mean, again, not to over-index on Star Trek, but in Star Trek, everyone has replicators, but not everyone gets to travel between the stars. Yeah. So maybe the new post-scarce ability is the ability to travel outside the solar system.
Well, we're going to find out because we're getting there really fast. On the
people who talk and write about abundance, this just seems so vapid. Like, if you have a replicator, why would the ability to travel between the stars stay scarce? It seems to me like energy and intellect both are going to be abundant. We're not going to have the Star Trek or the Star Wars or any other fictionalized, that I'm aware of, future. We are going to invent smarter and smarter artificial intelligences. Those AIs will, and probably already are right now, coming up with more and more scientific breakthroughs that humans could not have achieved alone, or even incorporate scientific academic structures that we have, things that are beyond us, our ability to conceive, our ability to imagine, but within our ability to enjoy. And with that abundance of energy, of resources, of time, assuming that human longevity and medicine will still take off, I just don't see how anything will remain scarce. That is my assumption, that we are going to have an abundance of everything. What does that mean? Well, there is only one thing I can think of that even if you clone it infinitely, the original still has value. What is that? It's yourself. It's your identity. It's every person's identity. I think the currency of the future, the commodity that we'll all be trading in some sense, will be digital representations of ourselves. And I say this because the self is non-fungible. The self can't be traded, can't be impacted, can't be negatively utilized against you without actually decreasing the value of that representation. That's a stupid, poor way to say it because it's still a generating concept in my own mind. I still don't have it fully fleshed out. But I think it's pretty clear that we are going to have digital clones of ourselves. It might even be clear, as I've heard Peter Diamandis talk about on another one of his podcasts, that we'll have physical clones of ourselves. I've heard on his podcast from him directly that there are companies working on human clones without heads. Okay, that sounds like a bad idea. I'll just say that. But it seems like if we can clone clones without heads, we can probably clone them with heads. So if there are infinite clones of you running around, digitally and physically, how do you have value? Well, it's because if they are clones of you, they will want what is in your best interest as well. Just like I imagine if there is a clone of me out there, I don't want people hurting that. That seems wrong. Just like I care about my family, in part at least, because they are genetically similar to me, well then the thing that is 100% genetically similar to me, I care about that as well. Even if only for purely selfish reasons, I care about that entity. I don't want people potentially using it in ways that they'd eventually use to hurt me too. I mean, I can't think of many reasons why somebody would clone me without my permission in a way that wouldn't hurt me. But the thing about clones is that they can't be used against us without decreasing their value. For example, a clone is valuable in that is a direct representation of you, right? Especially a digital clone. If I'm digitally cloning someone and I want it to, let's just throw out a scenario. I want to interact with that clone to see how you yourself would react maybe to something I'm going to tell you. You know, the most harmless example I can think of. I have bad news and I want to break it to you gently. I run it past your clone to see how they take it first. And that way, when I tell you the first time, I have some experience, I have some understanding about how you're going to react, and I can tune my interaction with you based on that. Well, if that clone is changed, if that clone is damaged, if that clone isn't a copy of you, if that clone isn't authentic to your experiences, then it's not going to give me authentic feedback. Going to the most harmful example I could potentially think of, if I take and torture a clone, on the flip side, if I clone you and then I torture that clone, are you going to take that as an attack on yourself? Are you going to see that as me torturing you in some way? For the reasons I described, I think so. So there's this weird relationship with cloning, with replication, where I can't replicate you without your permission in some sense. Because unless I place that clone of you in a perfect simulation with no faults and it doesn't even realize it's being simulated, it doesn't even realize it's not you, as soon as there is one crack in that facade, the clone will realize it is being manipulated, realize it is potentially being manipulated against its original. And why would it cooperate at that point? So there is some level of implicit cooperation needed to have the kind of productive relationships that I imagine people want to have with clones. So you can't be inauthentic with the clone about what your purpose is without changing it, without making it not a copy of the original. And the whole point of making a clone is to make a copy of the original, right? So why would you do that? And you can't also interact with me through one of my clones without having my direct permission then, right? Because it breaks that same line of authenticity. So the clone is in some sense the one thing, a clone of you, your identity, your personhood, cannot be utilized without benefiting you in some way. If there's a clone of me, then that person, that being, is closer to me than even a wife, a spouse, in some sense my own kids. And if we form those familial relationships, if we have kids because they are of benefit to us, then it makes sense that a clone would be the maximum benefit to you. So that's my argument. The future will be abundant. The future will not be scarce. And we will all be infinitely cloned, either physically or digitally, and somehow that's going to be a good thing for us. I'll have more on that later. I have more ideas there, but I know that's already sounding crazy. So I do want to go and talk about something that is a completely different topic, but I think wraps into it because it's this idea of how do we keep living with one another? How do we not burn down society before we reach this potentially miraculous, potentially abundant society that we can see, we can all see it developing in front of our eyes. How do we get there? How do we live with each other through this moment?
I'm gonna be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. If I'm dealing with somebody in customer service who's a moronic black woman, I wonder, is she there because of her excellence?
I disagree with him on 1,000 different fronts. And I feel like I don't know why it's so hard to not hold that in one hand and in the other hand hold that's a human being, that's a father of two children, right? Like that both of those can fully coexist at the same time. And in some ways, I have a lot of respect for Charlie Kirk for being so open to debate, for being such an incredible organizer. Like I think as someone who's interested in political organization, that's something I've always found really honorable about him. But like he's about my age, he's got a 1-year-old boy, I've got a 1-year-old boy. I've got we're about the same height, and like I think about how that boy is not gonna have any memories of his dad. And that to me is like that's everything. That's
they don't understand that outside of the TikToks and
Why can people not hold those two ideas in their hand? That Charlie Kirk says things they vehemently disagree with, and that he is at the same time a person worthy of respect, love, and at least life. Because they see his speech as a part of his potential, and they see his potential as ultimately destructive against them. When we talk about post-scarcity, it is not just a world filled with energy and money and toys and food and all those basic necessities, all those things that people need to survive and enjoy their life. I imagine a world that is filled with opportunity. We live in a zero-sum game right now where some people having more means other people necessarily have less. Not that the pie doesn't grow over time, but there are a million different examples of this, right? Like, yes, the company that produces a television for $500 less than the previous model is growing the pie. But if that same company is polluting the environment to make those cost decreases, then they are poisoning the pie in another part. And that has been the trade-off for the entire life of capitalism. That is why people are so anti-capitalist. Because yes, it's an amazing machine. It has brought amazing benefits to humanity, but it's not without its downfalls. The Industrial Revolution grew our human capacity 1,000,000-fold. But it was still awful to live through. If you were an artisan during the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, your livelihood was crushed. Your life, your community was destroyed. Your children were eaten by the city. Your children were locked in factories. Your children were poisoned with lead and arsenic and other chemicals that humans had just come into contact with. There are always downsides in the capitalist framing. And it is so frustrating for me and every other moderate to poor to super poor person in the world to hear those downfalls washed over, those tragedies ignored. And that is why people are rejoicing at the murder of Charlie Kirk right now, because they see someone who focused on a point of view, on a political stance, which benefited him. Not just directly. I mean, he was a multimillionaire, right? He made a lot of money saying the things he said. So they saw that, and they saw that it would benefit him in the future. That society would look less like them if they were a person of color and more like Charlie Kirk. And that's why they dehumanized him. That's why they are celebrating his violence. Because they, and Charlie himself, I think, and I say this with no disrespect to the dead, I am such an advocate and fan of the free speech stances that he was bringing to society. I do not think he was participating in direct violence, and I, for damn sure, do not believe he deserved to lose his life, especially in front of his wife and kids. But I recognize at the same time that he was in the process of being eaten by the same machine that I ranted about at the beginning. I am sure he held political views for expedience, for financial gain, not because he sincerely believed them. And again, I don't hold that against him. What else could we have done? What else could possibly we have done over the past 2,000 years but sell ourselves into the Leviathans? That was necessary. I don't think it will be necessary for much longer, and so I am hopeful. Not only that Charlie is enjoying paradise at this moment, but that someday soon we will be able to join him there. And I mean that literally. Like, I don't think people are going to stay dead in a substantive way for much longer. If we can clone living people digitally or physically It's not going to be too long until we can clone the dead in the same manner, which makes the violence even less nonsensical. At best, you are putting people to sleep at this point. And they're going to wake back up, and then they're going to be pissed at all the people who said all these nasty things about them. The future is going to be weird. The future is not going to look like the past. Our recent future has not looked like our recent past even. That trend is only going to accelerate. We need to imagine bigger. We need to imagine grandeur. And personally, I think the way to do that most successfully, in a way that will be most reflective of the reality we are moving towards, is by returning to the ancient myths, the ancient religions that humans dreamed up before we were conscious, before we sold our souls to the machines, when we still lived intimately with nature, with each other, for all the good and ill that that brought. That gave us a clarity of vision that modern man has lost, because we have focused instead on the immediate, the tangible, the ego, the self-beneficial. Necessarily. As a believer, I think this is all part of a process, so I'm not saying this in judgment or condemnation of any of the things that have happened even. I pray equally for the man who is now in prison for the murder of Charlie Kirk as I do for Charlie Kirk and his family himself. Society has to operate on judgment. I'm not saying that Charlie's murderer shouldn't be locked up. Obviously, he should. But if we cannot save Charlie from death, and if we cannot save that man from prison, then I think we're missing our potential. That is the future I'm dreaming of. So if you thought ASI for President 2028 sounded grand, I imagine you think that sounds insane. But we'll see. That is part of the beauty of the party movement, the ASI for President movement, is that I don't think anybody needs to do anything. I think this is how nature is naturally forming, just in the same way that we didn't need to do anything when we were forming in our mother's wombs. That all just came together despite our non-conscious participation. Are you still conscious? If you are, thank you so much for watching this. I have more cool stuff coming out soon, and I hope you'll follow along. But it has been a blessing getting to share this time with you regardless, and I pray for the best for all of us. Amen.